So, yeah.
I'm excited about the next speaker.
You need to listen to the next speaker, sir. Absolutely, because we're going to be talking about stress and lack of sleep. It ain't nothing. We can get our diet perfectly, but sleeping...
This is my biggest problem, and I'm excited. I'm going to be sitting right over there because I, on average, get less than 4 to 5 hours of sleep. So I know it's my number one problem.
Yeah.
And so we've got Brian Lenzkes.
Brian Lenzkes.
There we go.
Which we will probably screw up at least 4 more times before we introduce him fully. But Dr. Brian Lenzkes is an internal medicine physician based in San Diego and has focused much of his attention on metabolic disease. He earned a Bachelor's of Science in Biology from UC Irvine before attending the University of Southern California School of Medicine, where he graduated in 1999. Dr. Lenzkes, woohoo, I'm so excited, completed his residency at Scripps Mercy Hospital in San Diego and served as chief resident before joining a private practice. He was a partner in a group practice from 2004 to 2020, but grew increasingly disillusioned with the standard medical model, focusing on disease management rather than a more holistic, patient-centered approach. In 2020, he started his own direct primary care practice called Low-Carb MD in San Diego in order to focus on metabolic disorders and obesity, and he has focused on patient education, and this gets me so excited, and medication deprescribing. How exciting is that? Can we give it a clap of hands? Medication deprescribing. I love it for his patients. He also leads community Zoom meetings and regular hikes with his patients in order to provide a safe and encouraging environment for patients to support each other as they improve their health. He is co-host of the Low Carb MD podcast, as well as host of the Life's Best Medicine podcast. He has been a speaker at multiple Low Carb USA events. We're glad he's here today, as well as Low Carb Denver, and has given several lectures for the Nutrition Network. He is passionate about medicine and bringing positive change to the medical community through lifestyle interventions. In his spare time, Dr. Lenzkes loves spending time with his family and friends while hiking or riding his road bike. Most importantly, he is happily married to his high school sweetheart. How cute is this? And has 2 daughters. It is our great honor and privilege to present Dr. Lenzkes.
So, Dr. Lenzkes, can I ask you a quick question, put you on a spot, and throw my wife under the bus at the same time?
Yeah.
Since we're talking about sleep, what are your thoughts on hitting the snooze button 100 times in the morning?
Yeah, the best thing is if you can wake up without it, but most of us need it to get up, right?
Not 9 times.
Yeah, we all snooze. We all leave our alarms on and wake everyone else up.
Sorry, Joe.
Hey, it's great to be here. Oh, I need the, it's going to be hard to, I think I need the advancer. Hopefully I'll be able to figure this out. So it's great to be here in Utah, everyone. And so we're going to talk crazy crap this morning. And I just wanted to start out when Dave says a good guy, Dave is the good guy. He's a scientist, and what he's talking about has revolutionized what we're doing in medicine. So we need these scientists, and we have to figure out how we each use our skill set and giftings to help each other. So a lot of what Dave has talked about is what we're doing in practice now. So it's pretty awesome to have him. So, gosh, they already did my intro. I don't have to do anything. I really don't have conflict of interest other than one of my podcasts is sponsored by Simply Snacking. But I'm not really pushing their product here, so that doesn't matter. I'm definitely not sponsored by pharma because I like to get people off their meds, right? So for us doctors, our patients are like this huge puzzle we're trying to figure out. There's so many pieces where there's so much baggage we bring with us, childhood experience, all this. And we say, how do we help that person in front of us? So the most complicated part, believe it or not, it is attached to, as some of the doctors will say, this is attached to the body, is the brain, the heart, how stress affects us, how our self-esteem affects us, self-doubts, all these things when we're going on this journey of changing lifestyle, because it's really hard to do. So which model is it? On Twitter, there's endless debate and fights about, is it calories in, calories out, exercise more, eat less. We've all heard that from our doctors growing up, and it's so frustrating, right? But do calories play a role at some point, right? carbohydrate insulin model, which most of us are looking at as a majority of what we're doing, saying we really can't just eat 500 calories of gummy bears a day and think we're going to be healthy. We really have to, have a healthy diet. Or is it just bad genes, bad luck? I'm just one of those people, I just got bad luck, right? I got dealt a bad hand, and I can never overcome that. Poor willpower, laziness. A lot of people who are overweight struggle with this, where they'll go ask someone else a question rather than someone who's obese, because they think that they just are lazy and they can't think for themselves. Could it be more complicated? Could there be more to it just than any of these models that we argue about and we fall on our sword about? So this is me growing up. When I was really young, I was pretty healthy weight, but then as you can see, in middle school, you start gaining weight, you start saying, uh-oh, now I'm on this path, right? So fortunately, I started doing sports, so you could see that first picture was my freshman year, and then my junior year. So you could see over time, being in sports, athletics, moving, you could still change, even though I might have been dealt a bad card to start with, I could kind of start overcoming it the right way by lifestyle. And there's me with my high school sweetheart who's here with me today, still. But that was during wrestling season. Oh, hey, Chris, I don't think you started the clock, by the way. So that was during wrestling season. So I in high school, I would go from 205 pounds, because I was short I still am short, but short for a defensive line guy in the middle of the defensive line. So my two best friends were like 6'2", 6'3", 6'4", and it's me in the middle. Like, it would drop like this, right? So I had to put on weight to play, and then I'd have to get down to 165 for wrestling. So those 40 pounds, I would do in like 6 weeks, 8 weeks, like just killing it, right? Doing the biggest loser, worst diet ever. And so this is me. Over the years, I started gaining weight, and I go, it's just, this is right before I started my keto journey, right? So this guy's making fun of me. I can see what he's looking at, right? I'm petting the elephant. I'm thinking, wow. I'm doing the ADA's recommended diet. My wife is making me green shakes every morning. I'm working out 6 days a week, and I keep gaining weight. So I keep thinking, is it stress? What is it that's causing this? Why is it that I'm doing everything right, and all my patients, the way I think, are lying to me? Maybe they're doing the same thing I'm doing. So this is me in Guatemala. I've done a lot of medical mission trips, short term, like 10 days, 2 weeks, something like that. So these two guys that are with me were two doctors, and you can see how fit these guys were. So we were going to hike a volcano one day. And so it was the first time in my life where the guide looked at me and goes, you need a horse. You're not going to make it. And I said, what do you mean I'm not going to make it? I played football. I'm an athletic guy. So you're not going to make it. And if I have to go halfway up the volcano and come back and get a horse for you, I'm charging you double. I'm like, you know what? I'll die first on this side on the volcano. Luckily, I made it up the volcano, right? But you could see my shirt was pulling at the buttons, and it's really, it's embarrassing. So that's it. I'm going low carb. What do? I get back. I was influenced by one of my patients, and this is why it's so important to listen to what other people are doing. So I see a guy who lost 40 pounds. I said, okay, what are you doing? He goes, you're not going to like it. I said, what are you doing? It's called the fast diet. I go, I don't like the fast diet. There's no such thing as a fast diet. You can only lose so much weight a week. So it turns out he was fasting on Tuesdays and Thursdays, and the other days he was basically eating whenever he wanted. And I said, well, if you fast on Tuesday, you must be starving on Wednesday and eat twice as much. He said, no. The weird thing is I'm not hungry. So I went down this path, right? Of course, Jason Fung. I look at his video and I see him talking. I go, I wonder what this guy's selling, And at the end, he said, I'm not selling anything. I'm just saying this is what works for people. And he's talked about insulin resistance. So then I started looking at this area of medicine that I'd never looked at before. So I started doing strict stuff, cut out the processed foods, worked out regularly, and I was rewarded with this. And you can tell this is my old office. I scribble out someone's, I don't know if that was personal information or not, so I just wanted to be safe. But I get this hive. I've never had allergies, never had asthma, never had anything. So it progressed. And I'm like, what the heck is this? I get hives all over my body, like face, So I'm like, this is weird. Maybe the ketogenic diet's not a good thing for me. Maybe I'm releasing toxins or something else weird's going on. Then I started getting this rash on my hand, and I was out to dinner with a friend, and his wife looked at my hand and said, hey, have you ever been checked for mold? I said, mold? Why? She goes, you have a mold allergy. She said, I almost died. She was working for a major university, and she started having what they call panic attacks. They sent her to 2 psychiatrists, psychologists, and they thought she was actually having her airways closed because of the mold in the building. They ultimately figured it out. But she was intubated ultimately. She goes, don't mess around with this. You got to get it figured out. So all of a sudden I'd have hot coffee in my lip. That's my daughter, the supportive daughter making fun of her own dad. So Now we're all close friends because no one sees these pictures except you all, right? Now all YouTube sees it. But this is what started happening. I was Angelina Jolie at one day, and then The Godfather the next day. But this was ongoing, and I was trying to figure out what in the heck's going on. So that's me at my office. Brutal. You got to see patients. Guess what? I lived on prednisone for 2 years, basically. I was just doing that to work. And you can see all these pictures were in my old office. And I think that will tie. So I go to Low Carb San Diego, and who's there? Dr. Westman and a bunch of panelists. So I get up there, and I say, I'm going to ask these guys a question. So I say, Dr. Westman, can you get hives and all this facial swelling and all this weird stuff from a ketogenic diet? It's going to be a side effect from ketosis or weight loss, releasing toxins or something like that. Should I liberalize my carbs a bit? What do I do in this situation? And basically they said, Brian, if you want sugar, go and have it. You don't have to make an excuse, right? I'm like, I don't think I'm making an excuse. But all the panelists looked at each other and they go, this is not from a ketogenic diet. And no one has seen it. So I'm like, if no one has seen this, I must be a huge outlier. So ultimately I went, as my friend's wife told me, and said, get evaluated. So I went and got tons of food allergy panels because I knew, like we were out, the first time it happened, we were in Big Bear on vacation, and all of a sudden I go, I think I got bit by something, and my lips swelled up like crazy, right? And it turns out wine, cheese, almonds, pecans, all these stuff on the low-carb diet were causing this to happen. So I said, that's kind of weird. So anyways, I went in and got a food allergy panel, so they stuck me with all this stuff, right? You can see all those fun needles. I'm like, seriously, guy, isn't there a better way to do this? But ultimately, he sat down with me and said, Brian, I got a bad news for you. I said, what am I allergic to? He said, nothing. I said, how can I be allergic to nothing? And he goes, I think it might be a mold allergy, right? So ultimately, when I was at Low Carb Denver, as a matter of fact, feeling great, I never had any problems when I was in Guatemala jungles, Vietnam, El Salvador, nothing. In my office, I would get in 10 minutes after returning from a trip. So I don't think I can get the pointer out that way, but that stuff that you see, you could see the rust there, and that was the ceiling tiles above my office when they looked in there. And that's supposed to be pink. Fiberglass is not quite pink anymore. That stuff that looks like an animal is pink. And you can see all the metal was totally rusted. So this is a process that was going on for a while. So I thought, why am I susceptible? Well, at that time, I was working 16-hour days, stressed out, running around like an idiot, next patient, 50 patients a day or whatever, 25 patients a day. And so I just put this here to say, look, I survived that stuff, and I still have my high school sweetheart, but I was able to wear my Letterman's jacket, right, last year because we had an 80s get-together party. So the take-home message, buy your jacket really big if you're in high school so that you can impress your friends down the road. But really, I started looking at the elephant in the room, which was stress, right? I started looking at it, and I've noticed this. So there's a lot of things. My job, I'm not a scientist like Dave, so my job is to observe and see, like, why am I seeing this? And so many times you'll hear Tro and I talk about on the podcast, it's like we're seeing something, but we don't know why, but we're seeing it. So what's the effect of stress? This is my hardest patient, middle-aged, you're a real estate agent, you're stressed all the time. While we're having our consults, you're typing on the computer, sending emails, go, hold on, doc, I'll be right with you, right? Did you prepare your food for the week? No, I don't have time, I'm too stressed, I got it. So that, I started seeing this for sure correlation. Everyone I talk to says, what's the biggest killer? Stress. Number 2 is lack of family support, right? So this, when you're a single mom, you got all, it really makes it tough for sure. Even eating keto and low carb and carnivore, and they're still struggling. You go, why are they struggling so much more than somebody who doesn't care about it? They go, I lost 5 more pounds, big deal, right? It's amazing. So part of this is being Zen. Most of us are caregivers, so we worry about everyone else before ourselves. And so this is a continuous glucose monitor on one of my patients who's a nurse practitioner. So you can see this is where she's running right now, around 190 to 100 are normal. Hopefully you can see that okay on your end. So that's on Friday. Here she is on Saturday. So I'm looking at this tracing and going, wait a minute, this is weird. You usually run around 90 to 100. Now you're running 160, 180 all day long. And then you have this huge spike right here. I said, what happened? What was going on that day? So anyone have a guess? She was fasting, and she had to give a talk. So right here is where her talk started. Right here's where her talk ended, right? And I've done this before, talking to people. I check my continuous glucose monitor and go, what the heck, my sugar's through the roof. But even if you're not nervous, just being excited about something or passionate about something, you can spike your sugars like this. So all day she was like that. Then look at that trailing down right after she finished her talk. And the next day, her sugars were lower than normal the entire day, right? Even eating low carb. That, by the way, that top tracing was not fasting. She was eating her normal low carb diet. So I thought, wow, that's pretty interesting. And she was struggling with weight loss too. So there's another guy, one of my patients, who Came to me as a type 2 diabetic on meds. We got him off his meds. He's doing well. He's not super overweight, but he's metabolically sick still. So anyways, he's doing great. He happens to be a CFO of a major corporation who 24/7 phone, text, call. And he said, guys, look, I just had my new grandson. I'm going to New Mexico. Don't bug me for 10 days, right? If the place burns down, I don't want to know about it for 10 days. So what did he do here? He flew into New Mexico. Yo quiero Taco Bell, right? His family goes, look, we're too busy, and he doesn't eat Taco Bell. The tracing below that is what he normally runs, like 90 to 100, kind of like my other patient. And I was like, man, 4 hours up, and it dipped and did crazy stuff. And he goes, I didn't even enjoy it, but that's what they were having, and I just joined them, right? So the next one here is a little bit of chips and salsa, carne asada, and a chili relleno, right, the next day. The day after that, that big spike you see on the bottom was exercise. So that was a good thing. So he said, I'm going to be pretty good today. He knew he blew it the day before. So just to give you an idea, exercise, not all spikes are bad on a continuous glucose monitor. He's releasing sugar for him to burn, and we see that quite frequently. So that's another thing that can raise it up. And then those 2 little bumps, he had dinner, and then he had a little dessert. Someone made cookies or something that they said he had to try it. So the next day, right, biscuits and gravy for breakfast, right? Goes at 256, and he basically said, oh, crap, I'm not going to do that again. And this is why I like the continuous glucose monitor, because he could see it. He doesn't need me to tell him. He told me, oh, my gosh, wait till you see what happened on Wednesday, right? And then they had dinner that night, went out again. The next day, he said, okay, I got to get back on track. So what does he have for breakfast? Eggs, bacon, and avocado, right? Look at that, how flat that is. So he didn't get that huge spike that he would have got if he would have had that same breakfast again. And then that night, he did great. He goes, okay, I'm going to have a protein bowl. And they said, just like yesterday, we were at the salt mine, and they said, you got to try the sweet potato fries, right? So he tried the sweet potato fries, and it spiked his sugars again. So this is 10 days of this. So what were the net results for this guy? 10 days vacation, seeing his grandkid, away from his stressful job, less weights. He did some walking. He goes, Brian, I wasted time. I was just sitting there playing games, and we were laughing about dumb stuff we did as kids and all this stuff. Spent time with his friends and family. Laughed more than usual. Got away from the computer, cell phone, all that. In 10 days, he lost 8.8 pounds eating like that. So when we say it's all about diet, it's not just about that. There's other factors playing a role, right? So there's a great paper I read, great brain-gut microbiome interactions in obesity and food addiction. I think it's really worth reading this. It's a long paper. But in a nutshell, basically what they were saying, we have a bidirectional communication from our gut to our brain, right? So the brain will tell the gut what to do sometimes. When you get stressed and you have to go to the bathroom, right? Different things like that. And then also the gut's going to tell your brain what to do. So people who struggle with obesity, a lot of times they're going to have this highly palatable food. They want to have more. So their friend could have 1 cookie and they're happy. Now they need 5 cookies to get the same effect. So there's an effect of this chronic barraging of our system with sugar, which spikes the dopamine, where you need more and more to get the same effect. You know, it's like alcohol. If someone drinks 12 beers a day and they come over and you give them 1, they're not going to be really happy. They're like, this does nothing for me. But if they haven't had a drink in a year, then all of a sudden 1 drink will do it for them. So there's definitely data showing this, that you're going to crave those foods, and it's going to obsess your brain a lot more. Short-chain fatty acids are made by the gut microbiome, and there's tons of research on this. And I would challenge anyone, just go look at gut microbiome and then fill in whatever you want. And there's study after study showing this, that us Western guys thought were crazy, crazy information. You think this is all, hocus pocus stuff. But these short-chain fatty acids tell your brain that you have satiety. Because really, ultimately, we're looking for satiety, where we don't have to eat everything in the world. We say, okay, that's enough, I'm good, right? And not overstuff ourselves. So there's a huge influence of the vagal nerve on satiety pathways. Here's a huge thing that they showed in their studies. They went back and they say, okay, is it genetic? Does it just run in the family? They said it was mom's stress when she was pregnant. A lot of us use the Yale food addiction scale, and we say, okay, early childhood trauma highly correlated with obesity, but why, right? So was mom stressed when she was pregnant? Was she a single mom, financially insecure? And this may bleed over more into our inner cities where we have a huge obesity rate. Could that be contributing, right? This early childhood stress, financial insecurity. Did mom eat a lot of processed food? C-section versus vaginal birth. These are things I never even considered. Vaginal birth, lower incidence of all these problems as we get older. Food addiction, diabetes, obesity. C-section, you don't get the vaginal microbiome. Breastfed versus bottle fed, right? A lot of us are saying, okay, well, let's just bottle feed. And there's a huge difference in outcomes as we get older. And again, it has to do with the gut microbiome, at least as a partial cause. Stressful home environment, early childhood trauma, we all know that, going through a divorce, going through those things. That picture of me as a middle schooler, my parents were divorced, I'd go home and we'd have snacks and play video games, right? It wasn't, you weren't eating healthy and we didn't know. And back then it was the Entenmann's cakes and all that we thought if it's low fat, you can have as much as you want, right? So trauma, antibiotic use is a huge one. The more antibiotics you took as a kid, the more likely you have obesity. I just have a patient that I saw, new to me. She's a law enforcement officer, been thin her whole life, and all of a sudden she gains 80 pounds over the last 3 or 4 years. I said, what happened? That's unusual to happen. So I said, did you go through a divorce, stress, what happened? And she said, no, I got sick and it must have done something to me. But she was on antibiotics for 3 months, right, for a stomach infection. And after that, she can't lose weight. So maybe the gut microbiome is playing a role in this. And then also as a kid, was food a reward? Was it like, oh, you had a hard day, here's a cookie. Oh, you passed your test, here, let's go out to dinner tonight. And all those things, that frontal part of the brain. Adult stress, poor sleep, all these things play a role. Common denominator, all these things that they're talking about affect the gut microbiome. So this is from that same study. So basically, hopefully, you can see the healthy gut microbiome on one side has a thick mucus layer protecting the colon lining, and the other one with a food-addicted person, very thin mucosal lining, and a ton of, they're going to have a less diverse gut microbiome. And they go through, and Dr. William Davis, I mentioned him, there's a ton of different microbiome. If you're missing it, let's say you're missing this and this, Parkinson's. You're missing this and this, lupus. And it's incredible when they go back and look at the effects. And so on one side, you see you have a thick mucus layer. You basically have Teflon coating everything, all the toxins from these bacteria. And remember, these bacteria are dying off. And they give off something called a lipopolysaccharide, which is highly correlated with inflammation in the joints, depression, anxiety, stress, not sleeping, and as you say, uh-oh, we start getting into the cycle. So you really want to protect that gut microbiome. Very interesting, there's different ones that, Lactobacillus rhodori, for instance, it helps you to make oxytocin in your brain. It communicates to the brain, and oxytocin helps us to communicate better, to hear your side of the story, to have compassion. As a matter of fact, with kids with autism, they have very low levels of this. So maybe so when they replace it, they're seeing that they're socially less awkward and that they can interact better with people. So there's a lot of stuff like that we don't really think about, but diet plays a role in shaping the gut microbiome also. So basically the thing I think they left out of this study, you can kind of look at it yourself, but they're showing how we can change these things. And the thing they leave out is carnivore, low carb, and what we're talking about. They're saying, look, you could take drugs that can change the gut microbiome, and they can. Surgery, and this may have to do with gastric bypass or balloon. It does change the gut microbiome for a while because you're fasting for a while and then you're eating, you can only eat so much. But what happens when you go back to drinking soda and having chips and crackers and stuff and stretching that out? Is that why we have, we lose our remission, we start gaining weight again? And then there's drugs that can affect the satiety hormones and all that. So here's another one. This was a huge one. Dave mentioned I'm glad he mentioned that about colitis. On our podcast, we interviewed a guy named Brett Ender, and he had severe colitis, and his story is public. Severe colitis as a college, highly recruited pitcher, but then he got to college, stressed, going out drinking with his buddies, trying to keep his scholarship, trying to keep his grades up, girl problems, whatever. Then all of a sudden he says, I'm going to the bathroom like 10 times a day, and then ultimately it was 30 times a day with blood. And he said it was so crazy, and then ultimately he went on a drug called Remicade. He brought his symptoms like 90% better, but he still couldn't function. You think he couldn't go on a date, right? Because he would leave the table 10 times during a meal, and they think, his date would think he was on drugs or something. So ultimately, his doctor never talked to him about nutrition, and he comes across Sean Baker and says, I'm gonna try carnivore and see what happens. Within 3 months, he's off all meds, right? It's insane. And I'm thinking, how can this be? So that's why I started looking at this gut microbiome and saying, could it be that he just screwed up his gut microbiome so bad with stress and not sleeping and all these bad things we know about that can have an effect? So I was like, what can chronic stress do? So, mice, right? So the happy mouse in the overalls, they took 30 mice and they put them into two groups. One group, they're over listening to Bob Marley, relaxing on the beach, whatever they do that make mice happy, smells like cheese the whole time. The other 30, they put them in a stressful environment. Cats chasing them, lights, sirens. They can't sleep at night, loud sounds, and they're scared the whole time for 30 days. So they bring them back together and they say, okay, let's give them this dextran sulfate sodium DSS. What happens to the healthy ones? Nothing. Had no effect. All of the sick ones, the ones who are stressed out, got colitis. And they said, well, that's interesting. And they looked and they said, okay, what is it? Their stress hormones were totally different. That lining that we talked about in the gut was gone, and their gut microbiome was terrible. The other one had like rose gardens growing in their colon. They look great. So then what they did is they got the healthy gut, and they took some of the stool, the gut microbiome out, and they gave it to the sick one. And the sick one got healthy. So they said, okay, let's take some gut microbiome out of the one with colitis and put in the healthy one and see what happens. They got colitis, and they felt terrible. So it was like they were stressed out, but they weren't going through the stress. So it showed there was more to it than just the cortisol and the high stress. So it's like, well, can this apply to us also? So then what they did is they took the healthy ones that were left, and they said, well, let's give them a week of antibiotics, and then we'll give them that DSS again. And they all got colitis, right? So for us Western docs, we've been saying for years, the biggest advances we've had in survival are because of antibiotics. And now all of a sudden we say, like I'm giving you antibiotics just to be safe so you don't get an ear infection, right? So maybe we're doing some damage and causing colitis in people. And again, these were the mice when they looked at the same thing that we're talking about. No mucus in the colon on the stressed out ones. And then they have these leaking of these lipopolysaccharides. Interestingly, in practice, I've had people who, let me just tell you a step back. So for me, I said, why was it that I got so sick and had all this stuff with the mold where there were other people in the building? Well, they weren't there 16 hours a day or 18 hours a day like I was. May not have been as stressed as I were, but they were having little sinus stuff, little stuff, but nothing like your face blowing up like that crazy stuff. So it turns out I was watching a podcast and they were talking about parasites. And I was like, well, it's kind of interesting. And they asked the guy, how prevalent is it in the United States? And he said 70%. Like 70%. In Guatemala, that's all we talk about. We treat all these kids for parasites. But we don't think about it here. And I thought, well, I was in Guatemala and I've been all over the world. Maybe I picked up something. So I get tested, parasite, treat for it. Now we can go to our friend's house. If I go to your house and you had mold, I would tell you, I go, you got mold in your house. Like I would have hives and my face would swell up or my eye would swell up the next day. So interestingly enough, I tested positive and I treated for parasites. That night at 9, and since I left my old practice about 2 years ago, I haven't had any big episodes. I woke up at 1 in the morning, my whole face was swollen, my lip was swollen, hives. I'm like, I'm either allergic to the medicine or something else is going on. Talked to 2 doctors that I know who are good docs, and they said, you had parasite die-off. This lipopolysaccharide, if you react that way, you get that. If you get diarrhea, you get worse diarrhea. If you get constipated, you get worse constipation. So since I went through treatment for that, I go to my friend's house and stay the night where I would always get hives. I get nothing now. So I tell them, look, maybe you got rid of your mold, or maybe what I did changed something. So stress. So this is kind of what I think of is this. We're stressed, you're having a hard life, everything's terrible. And a lot of this is our focus. Maybe we make life more stressful than it has to be. Then we get poor sleep, then we have poor eating, then we gain weight, then we're stressed because we gain weight, then we can't sleep, and then we get into this cycle, and it's hard to, so basically we screw our gut microbiome through that, right? Because when COVID hit, we all got stressed out and worried and tense, and we couldn't do things we used to do. We couldn't exercise as much, so maybe that was a contributory role to what we all went through. And so how do we fix that? The worst thing you could do is having a stressed out person, and you go, hey, stress is killing you. Oh no, what do? Get rid of my stress? I mean, you can't get rid of it when you have it. So what do? When you have poor sleep? Processed food, sugar, antibiotics, alcohol. I'm just the messenger. Artificial sweeteners are going to affect the gut. We always argue, does it spike the insulin or not? Does it spike the sugar? Well, what about if it's screwing up your gut microbiome? Maybe that's a part of it too. Lack of exercise. Exercise has been shown to make the gut microbiome more diverse. So if we're trying to do everything we can for these problems, maybe we have to throw everything. Because some people will do low carb and they go, I'm not exercising, right? And other people say, well, I'll exercise, but I'm not eating low carb. So we got to fix some of these problems. And if we can knock them off, we got to knock off what we can. So stress management, exercise will help. Eating real food helps. Don't smoke or drink to excess. Get sufficient sleep. Has anyone heard these things before? Yeah. Right? Dr. Bickman, man, this guy had a huge influence on my life, right? I just got to go have lunch with him my wife and I got to go meet his wife, and it was awesome. But he knows his stuff, right? He knows his stuff because everything comes back to the same thing, because we could say it's about mitochondrial health. Okay, how do I get my mitochondrial health better? All the stuff Ben said. How do I get this health better? The gut microbiome. do what Ben says, right? So it kind of all fits together. You go, okay, these are all things we have to look at. We can't just say, change your diet and everything's gonna be great. Or just get a good night's sleep and everything will be fine, even though you're fighting with people all day. So these are critical things, and it all kind of comes back. And Ben had a huge influence on me because 3 years ago, I was at Denver, and I go to work out, and it's me and Ben. And I'm like, oh my gosh. And we didn't know each other at the time. And I said, Ben, if I want to live a long life, what do I got to do? And he goes, these 5 things. So I'm thinking, okay, I'm working 16-hour days. I'm stressed out. I can't spend time with my family. I'm not exercising as much as I want to, right? And you go, what am I doing, right? We have to make some changes somewhere. So probiotics, prebiotics, there's a lot of talk, and it's hard because there's so much stuff on the market, and some of them may not be helpful, but things like kimchi, fermented foods, sauerkraut, there's tons of data out there, and it's surprising how much that can help. Bone broth helps with the mucus layer. It does, and there's collagen. And so looking at stuff like that, so maybe, gosh, if I'm doing a longer fast, maybe I do bone broth and not just say, okay, I'm gonna white knuckle it and do it and be a macho, So there may be stuff we change. And the other thing that was interesting about this is there's people who, and Rob Sivas was the first one really to talk about it, and there's people who are carnivore for a long period of time, and all of a sudden their triglycerides start creeping up, their joints start hurting again. You go, is it possible that there's a Actinobacter mucinophilia, I think is that, I may be quoting it. Yes, see, that's why we have the experts in the audience to help me out. Yeah, Akkermansia, right? It will start eating your own mucus. So what good is that? I don't want to do that. I want to be able to provide it some, and that's why it's interesting in the carnivore community, there's some argument, do I have honey or not? Do I eat organs or not? And maybe that is part of the reason some people will benefit more than others doing different things. So it's kind of figuring out what works for us ultimately. And William Davis, a really good resource. He wrote the book, Super Gut, but Wheat Belly he wrote years ago. And he started seeing the same thing. People would get better to a certain degree, and then they would kind of plateau out and not do great. This is huge. This is something that we're facing. Probiotics and prebiotics have been demonstrated to have preventive effects. Alzheimer's disease, Parkinson's disease, depression, autism spectrum disorders, and many other neurologic and mental diseases. So this is something, and it's in its infancy, we don't understand enough, but we could say, what can I do to make it a little bit healthier, right? And they're also looking at schizophrenia, and you look at this, and this is what was interesting to us doing low carb and keto. We saw people were trying to treat their diabetes, and they come back and say, I'm in a really good mood now. I'm not stressed out. I'm not as tense. So is that possible that we're changing the gut microbiome to some degree, and that's having the effect? Lowering the insulin is having an effect. Lowering the cortisol is having an effect. And so it's not so crazy to think. I mean, the most heat I've ever taken, I think, is when Tro and I were noticing that people's addictions were getting better, right, on a low-carb ketogenic diet. And they're reporting it to us. We're not making it up. And they said any doctor who says that should have their license revoked, right? And I would probably argue now any doctor who says it's not should have their license revoked because it does play a role, and we're seeing it clinically. So which is better, hot-blooded or cold as ice? Who's the group for extra credit? Foreigner. Good, foreigner, yes. See, we're getting culturally aware today. So hot-blooded, cold as ice. So this is an interesting why I started looking at this a little bit. So sauna, some people swear by saunas and go, okay, that saved my life and I'm doing great, right? And if you're stressed out and tense, it may be something to look at. I've added that into my regimen based on what I'm reading. Decreased risk of cardiovascular disease, stroke, heart attack, hypertension, blood pressure dropping, neurocognitive disease better in a lot of these studies they're showing. Increased nitric oxide has the effect of exercise, right? And decreased arterial stiffness. So we're all kind of interested in this stuff with hardening of the arteries and cognitive deficits as we get older. Reduce symptoms of pulmonary disease, COPD, CHF, heart failure, arthritis, headaches, immune function, migraines. There's a lot of data that's actually surprising. Then you have the Wim Hof fans, right? They're like, wait, you should be cold, you shouldn't be hot, right? But there's data on that, just deep breathing, stress reduction, all these things can play a role. So go get a massage and relax for an hour, right? That kind of thing, if that's what you enjoy. Or go look at the lake and chill out a little bit. Because so many of us are so driven that we forget what matters. We forget about family and connections. And that's why I started Life's Best Medicine, because low carb MD, if I talked about this stuff, they go, don't talk about that. We just want to know about low carb. How many carbs should we have? What should we do? But over here, it's like, okay, if you're a jerk to everyone, it's not going to help you as much. Right? So laugh a little bit, have fun, and don't take life so serious. And really, because I'm telling you, the person who weighs themselves 6 times a day loses less weight than someone who weighs themselves like once a month or whatever's good for them. Some people, like Dave, may like data. Some people, I know the data, I know it's going to do this, and I don't stress out. But other people might catch themselves on a peak after you work out, for instance, may make a huge difference. Looking at puppies and all this stuff. But don't not give these guys a hard time a little bit, because as a matter of fact, when my dog that looked like this was a puppy, I was at work one day. This is before all the mold stuff. I'm like, my stomach, oh my gosh, it's like I have giardia, but I haven't been hiking. Giardia you get from hiking and camping and all this stuff. I feel terrible. Like, I feel horrible. And then all of a sudden my wife calls and says, hey, guess what? I took the dog in. She has giardia. I'm like, you're kidding me. The dog was raised on a little farm when she was little, and she was drinking water out of a bucket or whatever, and I licked my face and I got this stupid thing. I'm like, that's what it is. I do have giardia. But the treatment is worse than the disease. Flagel's kind of tough. I don't like that drug. So anyways, prayer, meditation, all of this stuff, people, oh, that's hocus pocus stuff, right? And I don't care what it is. Figure it out. Like, this guy's picking up women at his age, he's got the pick of the litter here, but he's out doing something he enjoys, right? They're doing Tai Chi, they're relaxing, they're taking it easy a little bit, not being stressed and running around like crazy. These guys, hey, if you want to dress up like a character, cool. Like, if that makes you happy, whatever, right? Right? Collect a rock, do a puzzle. So these are a couple of my patients I just wanted to share. This is a lady, CFO of a major corporation, stressed, tense, running around, that. So finally I say, hey, why don't you chill a little bit, relax, go for a walk, take it easy, because she's the caregiver, taking care of the kids, doing all this stuff. So sometimes, looking at it and saying, hey, what can I do, right? And so she made some changes. By the way, she came to me as a type 1 diabetic. They said, you have type 1. It's because her sugars were so high that her pancreas is not making any insulin. We get her, I'm gonna see her C-peptide, she's making insulin, she's been off insulin this whole time. But someone like that, they would have just said, yeah, and then it would have made her obesity worse, everything would have got worse with time. So you look and you go, gosh, like, let's evaluate and kind of know the patient and see what's going on with them. This is one of my guys, he works for PlayStation, of course, and PlayStation, to make their employees happy, said, hey, you have vending machines all along so he was drinking soda all day and having chips. Like, they would take a break, let's get chips, let's get a soda. So that's what he was doing. This guy, that's 16 weeks apart. It's ridiculous. And this guy I couldn't get him to exercise, and he didn't really care about weight loss. He was, I lost 8 more pounds. He's one of those guys that makes us all crazy. It's like, it's crazy. Just by cutting out soda, that's what he did basically, right? Now he's working out, putting on muscle mass, and the guy's a machine. And the other thing is, with this guy, over time, when he first started, when he would have anything off plan, his sugars would go crazy. Now he's like, hey, guess what? I had real ice cream last night. I had something else, and it doesn't even show on his CGM anymore. He's so metabolically healthy, it's ridiculous. And that's where he wanted to be. Like, his body wanted to be there, so it was easier for him to get to that level. And this is on a personal level, and this is why we do what we do. This is my niece. She has autism. And we were back at a wedding a few years back, and my sister-in-law and brother-in-law said, gosh, she's terrible. She's acting out. She's causing trouble. She's gained a ton of weight. And so it put a huge stress on the family, because she would throw tantrums. They couldn't go out to dinner. It was a nightmare for them. And so they said, what do you think? And I said, well, I hate to give family advice type stuff. So I said, you should watch this movie called The Magic Pill, right, with Jason Fung. And there was a girl on there who was on the spectrum of autism. And to see her at the beginning, she was like an animal, eating with her hands and eating goldfish. And that's what my niece was doing, goldfish and Cheez-Its. And it was a horrible diet. But if they didn't give her what she wanted, she freaked out. So it was just easier to say, here you go, right, like we do with our kids. And so she was terrible. And then now, it was funny, we were just back there for Christmas, and she lost tons of weight. She's eating healthy, and she knows. Like, when she goes and starts eating, like when they have other family visiting and they start eating bad food, she'll tell them, like, my brain's not good with this. Like, she knows, right? And so she stops, and she goes back, and she does better. So there's more and more data coming out on the autism spectrum with the importance of, like, how candida, too high or too low, can be a problem. So it's not just like there's a magic pill, kill off this, and you get better. But there's more data saying, hey, if we can replace certain part of the gut microbiome for these people and change the diet and change their stress and change their sleep. But she's hilarious, because she gets her 10,000 steps a day, and because of her autism, she'll say, like, she'll get her 10,000 and go, okay, I'm done. Like, but she won't, it'll be snowing, and she'll go out and get her 10,000. She goes, I have to get my 10,000 because that obsessive part of it. But she's doing it, and she feels great, and her mood's better, and her joints are better, and everything gets better, and you start looking at it from that standpoint. So thank you for putting up with my crap for the last 45 minutes or so. But, really, I think it's really important that we kind of step out and say, okay, when Dave comes up with something different, we have to analyze that and say, okay, let me apply that to my practice. Let me apply that to me and see what works, right? So we're seeing a lot of different improvements. And one company I'll tell you about, I have no financial interest in them, but I'm very intrigued for my patients and for us in the low-carb community. There's a product called Sugar Shift. And so it was out of necessity that we started doing things. This lady who was, did anyone hear the podcast on that? Life's Best Medicine? Yeah, I have a couple of people. Come on, guys. No, I'm just kidding. So her name's Martha Carlin. She was a corporate baron. She basically was a accountant that was really sharp on numbers. Okay, your company's failing, so she would change all the numbers and get them what they had to do to succeed. She made a ton of money, had a huge house, and she's sitting at dinner one night and looks at her husband, and he just stares at her blankly, and he doesn't have facial expression anymore. And she said, something's wrong with him. And he was clumsy and dropping stuff. So she takes him to a bunch of neurologists, and they find out that he has Parkinson's disease at 44 years of age. And she said, I'm going to be a widow in 10 years probably, right? Looking at the numbers and how this thing progresses. So she resigns from her job. Saying this is life's best medicine too sometimes. Resigned from her job, said, that's it. I don't need the money. I'm going to fly to every expert in the world. I'm going to find out how to help my husband. And so she flew around, and ultimately, everywhere she went, they said, the gut microbiome. There's 2 different types of Parkinson's, 2 different manifestations of Parkinson's. If they have this, here's what the gut microbiome looks like. If they have this is what the gut microbiome looks like. So she goes back and said, I'm going to get my husband evaluated. Sends off his stool, right? And so she's on a Zoom call with this person who's reviewing all of his numbers. And the lady said, don't tell me his history. Let me go through it. He's middle-aged. He's got Parkinson's, and he's morbidly obese. And she said, well, he's not morbidly obese, but he has Parkinson's. And she said, The lady looked at her stuff. She goes, he's overweight. No, he's not overweight either. He's a long-distance runner. Yeah, he's been a marathon runner his whole life. So he's carb loading, running marathons his whole time, like Professor Noakes used to tell people to do. He was the old school. So she started looking into it and said, well, and a vast majority of people with Parkinson's disease are also suffering with constipation. So she looked at all the data, and she talked to the world experts, and ultimately tracked down this guy who invented the bacteria that they drop on oil spills to eat up the oil before, to help get the environment back. And so she said, maybe he'll know what to do. So they start looking at all this data, and so ultimately they come up with this thing called Sugar Shift. So what it does is in the gut, it will convert fructose and glucose over to mannitol, which is a non-absorbable alcohol sugar. And it helps with constipation, helps with feeding the gut microbiome. So she started using that on her husband, and then all of a sudden she said, maybe my neighbor with diabetes will benefit them. So she starts helping people like in the neighborhood and all this stuff, and people start getting better. So if we're trying to get our body more insulin sensitive, we're trying to do this, so maybe helping with the exercise, helping with cutting carbs, we say, well, what else can we do, right? So I think it's those kind of things. We have to step back and look. And so her husband's still doing fine. She's helping community, and there's a problem that we have to fix. Like Dave's fixing a problem with cholesterol. What do? Is it bad or is it not bad? Do we worry about it or not, right? So that was the other thing. I saw Dave at my first conference. He was there talking to everyone and explaining it. And say, hey, look, go talk to your doctor, but here's what I'm seeing with these things. And so having some kind of, I think what's happened in medicine, we've lost our inquisitive nature to say, okay, I'm doing this, but it's not working. Why is it that I practiced for 19 years or 18 years at that point and never took a person off insulin, and within 6 months I have 11 people off insulin? It's like, it's crazy. After making fun of the chiropractor who says, oh, we're going to get rid of all your insulin, and they were doing it, right? So I think these things we have to have an open mind and at least saying, okay, could this be playing a role? What else can I change? What variable can I do? And I think sometimes just saying, it's not working for me, what works for Sean Baker, let me change what I'm doing, right? Let me grow a foot and see if that helps, right? Or whatever it is. But I think those things, but I think really stepping back and saying, okay, what matters? What's important? I think that's what we're trying to find out. What really matters? Like the speakers here, people are here because they want to help other people and they want to figure out their own problems as I do. So ultimately, maybe in the low-carb community, we say, okay, maybe we need a few more carbs. Maybe we need a few less. Maybe you need more carbs than this person over here. So I think it's really having that individualized approach. I think that's what I've learned. Some people, if you're too strict, they're going to go off the rails, right? And if you're too tolerant and they say, oh, I have cookies every weekend, I can't stop, then maybe we need to address that more from an addiction standpoint. So Bitten Johnson, a lot of these people that I'm talking to really have a ton of clinical experience, and they're saying, okay, addiction isn't for, not everyone has addiction. Some people it's just the way we were raised, or maybe it was all those antibiotics you took, or maybe it was just a bad upbringing, right? And that's how you deal with your stress. So I think it's just putting all these pieces together and figuring out for ourselves, am I that person who could have one cookie a month and I'm good? Or if I have one cookie, am I gonna have 30 cookies and be, passed out in the backyard somewhere with a sugar high, right? So it's just like with alcohol or smoking or anything like that. So I think it's really finding that approach. And in closing, I'll tell you, one of my patients came to me first day. One's really hardcore, the other one's not so hardcore, and she goes, okay, doc, I'm not giving up sourdough bread, I'm not giving up this, and I was like, this is the first time we're meeting. You should be fired up like at the church meeting right now, and everyone's ready to go before they go down the mountain and have to deal with their neighbors, right? And brother-in-law. So I was like, man, this is the first. And I said, why do you feel that way? And she said, look, and she's a multimillionaire. She owns wineries and does all this stuff. She goes, look, I know myself. I could eat glass for a month if you tell me to. I could starve myself for a month. I could do liquid fast. She told me all the stuff she's done. But she said, when I'm that restrictive, on day 31, I'm eating everything, and I can't stop. She goes, but if I know I could have a piece of sourdough bread in 2 weeks, I'll do it. So the first time she came back, I'm looking at her sugars. I was like, oh, no, it's a disaster. Her sugars were crazy all over the place. But it turns out it was all from Orange Theory, right? Whenever she worked out, her sugar spiked. And she's done fantastic, and she's happy as can be. So for her, that's what works. So if I say, no, you can never have that again, right? Then her brain just wants that. And then so it's figuring out each individual person and what works for you. And I think that's our job for ourselves, figuring out, can I work out more? Can I get enough sleep? Can I not volunteer so much at church or at, a volunteer that I'm doing and be stressed out all the time. So I think that's a big, huge part of it. And I just wanted to make that impact of saying, yeah, it's not just about the keto. It does help for sure. That's one of the factors. But also saying, okay, how do I deal with life? How do I manage these things? So thank you very much. I appreciate it.